With so many cameras on the market, it can be tough to know which one you should buy for YouTube. If you're looking for a camera that is not only easy to use, but also delivers high quality results. Well, we have about 25 different cameras. Some are more budget friendly, some are very high end expensive. And we're going to rank them based off of our experience of how we use them and see basically where they stack up against each other. So, hopefully, by the end of this video, you have a good idea on which camera you should be looking at and which ones to stay quite clear of. Well, I'm today joined by fellow creator Craig Pruitt. He's also an expert in cameras. And so we're going to kind of battle it out and see where we're going to rank these cameras. I'm pretty excited. How are you, Craig?
I'm hyped, dude. I mean, it's always a good day when we get to talk about cameras. And you and I nerd out all the time behind the scenes about cameras. So now we get to publicly share our rankings of all of these different camera bodies. So I'm hyped for it, man. We got lots. I mean, we can show the viewers here. Look at all these cameras we're going to rank. And this is what a tier list is. If you haven't seen one of these before, this is like a rating system. So S, right? It's S tier. It's like the supreme cameras. So anything S tier is like the best of the best. And then we'll rank A through E. Actually, right now, real time, we're going to change this. We're going to change this to letter F. We don't want E cameras. We want F cameras. So yeah, it's going to be F rankings. And so that's how we're going to do it. We're going to go through kind of different categories as well. So we have action cameras, point and shoots, professional, full frame cameras, and everything in between. So, all right, Nate, are you ready to start this out with the GoPro HERO13 is our first camera.
Yeah, so how do you feel about the GoPro section? We're going to look at action cameras or more cameras that are easily pocketable, travel with, vloggers. The first one, like Craig was mentioning on the list, is the GoPro HERO13 Black. This is the highest end GoPro, but really any GoPro. These have been a staple of YouTube content creation. They're so easy to use. You can mount them in particular places where you wouldn't want to damage your expensive camera. So, Craig, where should we place this? Where are you feeling?
It's kind of hard to place the first one because then everything is like starts getting built around it, right? So, I mean, the GoPro HERO13, it's a really good camera. I think even it's a lot higher resolution. I think you can shoot at like 5.3K, I think is the max that this camera shoots at, which is pretty wild. And you can, I think, shoot up to 60 frames per second in that, or in like a little burst mode, you can shoot in 120. So lots of resolution options. Image quality looks really good. So it's a higher resolution than even our next camera. We'll talk about the Action 5 from DJI. I feel like a good ranking for this would be maybe like a B tier camera for YouTube creators because it is pretty specialized. What do you think about the B ranking? How are you feeling?
I mean, that's pretty solid because, I mean, GoPros are just great all-around cameras. Like, they're good if you're looking for a behind-the-scenes angle. You could use it as your main camera if you're traveling. It's waterproof, so you can go underwater. So it's pretty incredible camera. So I would also think B would be satisfactory.
I love it. Okay, so then our next camera would be the DJI Action 5. So then the question would be, like, where does this go? If it sits here next to B tier, where are we going to place this thing? I think there's a couple of things, and I know you've done a dedicated review on this, so I'll let you speak to that.
But the two things have it right here.
Boom, there it is.
And I'm a pretty big fan of this camera. It's also a very GoPro-like camera, just made by a different company. And, there's what really makes this camera so amazing, in my opinion, is its ability to connect to a wireless microphone, some of DJI's wireless mics. So the Mic Mini or the Mic 2, and just having a little microphone that you can sync up to your GoPro. You don't have to worry about plugging anything in. That is such a game-changing feature. And for that, I think that bumps it up a notch, and I would put it at A tier.
I agree completely. And then you also get 47 gigs, right, of internal storage.
Yeah, yeah, you get internal storage. Oh my gosh, guys, if you ever went out to a shoot, forgot your SD card, and now you can't film a video, that sucks. It really sucks. So the ability just to always have storage on your camera, hit record, and you can go back to shooting, uninterrupt your day. It's a pretty nice feature, and I think more camera companies should definitely have internal storage.
I agree completely. And so I think these are pretty similar. I think just for those couple features though alone, I think it's just a little bit edges out the GoPro, but either of these action cameras are really solid. So speaking of DJI, our next camera is the DJI Pocket 3. So how are you feeling about the Pocket 3? I know it's something we talk about a lot. We both use the Pocket 3 on probably a, a weekly or monthly basis to create content with. So I personally love the camera. I think there's so many, it's my go-to vlogging camera. I think for me personally, if I'm going to choose one camera to vlog with, it's not going to be my phone. It's not going to be a mirrorless camera. It's going to be the Pocket 3. It's just so easy to use. The face tracking, dude, the face tracking, how it just tracks you wherever you go. Insane. So I love it. How do you feel about it? I'm tempted to put it S tier because there's like nothing like it. And in my opinion, it's the best.
Also, you took
camera.
the words out of my mouth. There's like, it's such a unique camera, and it's, if you're looking for something like that, that's gimbal, portable, great image quality. I think it also has a large enough sensor and gives you enough blurry background. So
Yeah.
it doesn't really feel like these other action cameras. Those have a very specific look. These actually look like a higher professional end camera. And yeah, it's so amazing. I've used the Pocket and the Pocket 2 before for like client videos where
Sure.
you have that really cool moving time lapse feature. And I love that to capture like behind the scenes of, I captured like a house being built. And so I could just grab a quick time lapse. And that feature alone is just so cool. So definitely worth having a kit. S tier, I think, has definitely earned that spot. It's a great little camera.
Yep. I think so too. And as we build this too, things might change along the way. It's like, is it really S tier? Well, we'll find out by the end of this video, and maybe one of these bumps up or so. But let's keep pressing on for some of these other, vlog action style cameras. Insta360 Go. This is the 3S, I believe. So, and you've actually done a review about this camera, and the camera itself though is the little guy on that thumbnail. I know it's really small to see. And then there's like a little housing that you can put in as well. But tell us about the Insta360 Go. What's the benefit of using it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I personally use the Go 2, which is a little bit older now, but is like under $300. If you want to watch that video, I have a video breaking down 5 cameras under that $300 price point. The Go 3S is the latest in the kit, and many of my complaints about the Go 2 is actually fixed with the Go 3S. And what makes this camera also pretty unique is it captures like circular video. And what I mean by that is like you can rotate the camera and it's going to stabilize. So no matter how you hold it, position it, it's going to keep that horizon nice and level. So it makes it quick for mounting onto your shirt, mounting onto a hat. Getting like first person perspective shots is very easy to do so. And that makes this camera so unique. It's probably like the smallest camera on this list, believe it or not.
It is
and
the smallest.
That is just a unique selling point. And you have that little remote screen. You can pop out the camera, have a little screen. You can adjust settings. So pretty fun camera. I will say, Craig, this camera is pretty specific. So you can't really use it for everything, right? Action cameras, you can use it a little bit more. The Pocket 3 can use it for more things, but these are all still fairly specific on what you want to achieve. So, Craig, where are you thinking we should put this?
Well, I mean, it's actually, I think, sitting in a pretty good spot right now already with C tier. I would definitely rank it below, the Action 5 and the HERO13. So it's probably going to need to sit there. I don't think it's a D tier action camera necessarily.
Not bad. It's just very specific. And if you're looking for like a high-end professional shallow depth of field, this camera is not quite that. If you are snowboarding and you want to get that cool POV shot, this camera is so fun to use.
Yep, I agree completely. And then our last action style vlogging, these are kind of like weird cameras, right? So this is the Canon PowerShot V10. So this is a really super weird form factor. I actually have it in the studio here with me. I should have grabbed it to show you, but it's a super weird thing where it's like, it almost is like a cell phone design with a flip up screen. So you're able to see yourself, but when you flip it up, you're still filming horizontal, even though it feels like you're in a vertical orientation. So it's a 1-inch CMOS sensor as well. So a little bit of a larger sensor than some of these other action cameras would be. And image quality, honestly, is like not that bad. It's, the Canon colors, which look pretty good. You get 4K, I think, up to 30 frames per second. So it's a usable vlog camera. I think for a lot of people, though, it's just kind of a weird design and not very familiar. It's not to say you can't get good results with it, because you certainly can. But for me personally, I don't think it's better than the Pocket 3. I certainly wouldn't use this as my main vlogging camera. And frankly, for rating, I mean, as I look at this, I think C tier is probably where I would rank this amongst the cameras. What do you think?
It's a pretty decent camera. Again, it's more like I think it's more beginner friendly, if anything. And you and
Yeah,
I, we're like we want all the manual controls and all these things,
yeah,
and it's such like a unique form factor. But I could totally see this if you're traveling, want to film yourself. You could hand this to your little kid, and I'm pretty sure they'd figure out how to use it with that red record button right on the front.
yeah, yeah.
So really fun. I think C is probably appropriate. Very similar in many ways to Insta360 in terms of specific use case, but
Yeah.
more of a beginner friendly edge to it.
Okay, so I guess this rounds out our like action cam vlog cameras for now. Let's shift categories. Now we're going to look at some point and shoot options. We have several from Sony and
Okay.
one from Canon as well. So we'll start with the first one, which is the ZV-1. So this is the OG ZV. I
Mm.
think this is actually the very first ZV series camera. So where should we put this? And then maybe we can dialogue about it. I mean, maybe let's start at B tier. Maybe we'll go C tier. We'll be unbiased here and see if it works its way up. What are the
Yeah, I
benefits of the
mean,
ZV-1?
so this one is like your classic point and shoot style. So this is not only great for video, but photos as well. Some of these other cameras are just video focused. Yes, they can take photos, but if you want to do both really well, a point and shoot it would be your first category to kind of look at. I've actually used the ZV-1 on my own YouTube channel way back, and it helped me a lot just to get cool shots. Where I didn't need necessarily a whole expensive mirrorless camera, but I needed something for grabbing behind the scenes. What I love about this camera is number one, the sensor size is pretty large at 1 inch.
Yeah,
The zoom range, 24 to 70, that's like a perfect range where it's wide enough to film yourself, but also you can zoom in. Some of these cameras can't zoom in that we had
yeah,
mentioned. This one can actually zoom in, and it's a great looking image. Now, it's a little bit older.
it is.
Here's another benefit: flip out screen and autofocus. Those
Yep.
two things is
Oh
what's
my
going to help
goodness.
you create better YouTube videos because it gets out of your way. If you have a camera that doesn't have autofocus well and you nailed your take to camera, but it was out of focus, then you got to redo it. And that's not
Yep.
fun at all. So ZV1, I would say I'd probably bump it up to a B tier
B
in that
tier.
regard. It's
I like
great.
that.
I wish it had 10-bit video. That would probably make it an A or even S tier. But since it doesn't have that full color grading potential, B seems to be quite appropriate.
Hey, that's a great point. If Sony can drop a point and shoot camera with 10-bit color, they haven't done it yet. I don't know what's going on with them, why they won't release
Mm.
an update. Even like we'll talk about the RX100 series, but um, yeah, if they can do 10-bit color, that's going to be huge moving forward. So let's look at now the Mark II. So ZV-1 Mark II. We'll just pop it at B tier for now. The
Now
Mark
you
II had a
use
couple.
this camera, right?
Yeah, I have. So I actually did a review of like all of Sony's point and shoot cameras that they're kind of in production right now. So ZV-1, 1 Mark II, 1F, and RX100. So we have those four today we're ranking. And so the ZV-1 Mark II is a really good image. I'd say it's really comparable to the ZV-1, but there are some subtle differences. Like they changed like the USB-C port. So on the Mark I, it's a micro USB port, and then they upgraded it to a USB-C for live streaming. So that's kind of nice that you have that. And then you also get a wider field of view. You get an 18 to, I believe, 50 millimeter zoom lens versus the 24 to 70, because people complained that when you're vlogging, the 24 millimeters of the Mark I was just not wide enough. So they widened
Right.
it for the Mark II, which I think is a good benefit. The problem is, though, that they increased the price pretty substantially for the Mark II. And so I feel like for what you're getting, it's really not that much more of a camera for an additional $200 to $250. So, I mean, me personally, I would probably go for the Mark I over the Mark II, which, I mean, maybe the value of the Mark II is even less. Maybe it's more of a C tier camera because it's so much more expensive. What do you think?
Yeah, that's the biggest. Like when I was such a fan of the ZV-1, and when the Mark II comes out, naturally I think it's better. But when you zoom in, it gets much darker than the f2.8 that the ZV-1 had. And
Yeah.
so with that, still didn't have 10-bit. There was really no point in getting that. I think the only advantage the Mark II has is yes, it's a little wider angle, has some of the newer features of Sony that they offer. And I
Yeah,
think it has USB-C, so you can like plug it into your camera
it
or
does.
your
Yeah.
laptop as a webcam. So that is nice if you're looking solely to use it as a webcam. But I would, yeah, I would bump it down a notch because it's more expensive and it's not necessarily better.
Yeah, just not as great of a value as the
Mhm.
ZV-1. Okay, we'll leave it there.
Well, we do
We'll
have one
press on.
question I wanted to
Oh yeah,
approach
please.
real quick. Talk about low light on the ZV-1. So these are point and shoot style of
Yeah.
cameras. So they are going to be a little bit better in low light than some of the GoPros and the Pocket 3s, but it's not going to be great as some of the more expensive cameras. So it really depends on what you mean by low light. If you mean
Yeah.
filming in the dark, then you would want to save
Not
up
happening.
for some of these expensive cameras. But these will do decently if you have you're filming nightlife and you want to capture it. It's probably going to be a little bit grainy if you're doing video, but that would
Yeah.
be my take on the
If you
low
want
light.
to push your camera to like 2000 ISO, it'll still look decent. You know, if you get higher, 3200, 4000, 6400, it's going to look pretty grainy. These smaller sensors, and it's just the older Sony color science as well with all of these point and shoots. They just haven't updated them to the 10-bit color sensors. So it's not going to be that great. Colors are going to tend to fall apart. It's going to be pretty noisy for low light situations. I wouldn't, honestly, low light, Pocket 3 is great in low light. So I would go for
Mm,
something like the Pocket 3 or Action 5 in low light situations over the ZV-1 series personally. Okay, Nate, let's press on. We got several more point and shoots.
yes.
We got a lot more to go. So we're going to roll through these. ZV-1F. Oh my goodness. Where do I put this? I just
So
am
this is
tempted to put
very
the F.
similar.
Just put it straight
Just
to F
because it's
tier.
F.
ZV-1F. No, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, this is very similar to the ZV-1. The only difference is instead of the zoom lens, you now have a fixed lens, so you
Yeah.
can't zoom in or zoom out. But it is a bit cheaper. Craig, I know you reviewed this camera, so what's your take on it?
Yeah, so it's like really the only Sony camera you can get for under $500 in new condition. And so value-wise, I mean, it's a great entry point, but you are sacrificing quite a bit of things. Two big things are huge, okay? First thing, you cannot take raw photos with this camera. So if you're a
Really?
photographer, isn't that crazy? Dude, no
That
raw.
is nuts.
Like what kind of camera doesn't have raw photos? So I get that this is supposed to be a video vlogging camera, so maybe people don't care, but people who want to be hybrid shooters, you got to have that raw to edit your photos. So no raw. And then the autofocus does this weird like focus jittery,
Mm,
focus hunting that happens when you're in AF and you can see it around the fringes of your screen. And we've done a dedicated review of this camera. And we even reviewed all of these Sony cameras, point and shoots against each other as well. So look at that review and you'll see what you're sacrificing in terms of autofocus performance. I think D tier is a pretty good spot to put it, especially because if you put it in manual focus, it's a really beautiful image. It just lock it off on yourself if you're vlogging and you won't get any of those micro jitters. But when you get the jitters, it's pretty awful. So I'd say D tier or even F. If we want to put a camera in F tier, this might be the one to go there. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, let's do it for the memes. Put it at
Okay,
F.
do it for the memes.
Bad autofocus.
It goes
Bad,
F tier.
bad.
My goodness. Okay, and then final Sony point and shoot RX100 Mark 7. The couple things that you need to know about this are this is like their professional style point and shoot camera, and it has a viewfinder for photographers. It's like a pop-up
Mm,
electronic viewfinder, which is sick. It also has a control dial around the ring, so you still can zoom it. It's like I think this is like a 24 to 200 millimeter zoom range, which is crazy. I mean, it's a super long zoom. And I actually use this to shoot concerts that I can't get press passes for. I'll take it in, shoot concerts. It's a pretty sick camera for that regard. But it's like, I think it's like $1,300 new, which is crazy. I think B
that's
tier
pretty
is an okay.
expensive.
Yeah. I think B tier is an okay ranking for it, or C tier. It's an older camera too. It's built or made in like 2019. But if you want the best of the best, like build quality and features of a point and shoot Sony, I think the RX100 Mark 7 is it right now. And I hope they update this camera with a Mark 8 or like just redo the whole RX100 line completely one day. So, okay. Should we dive into the last Canon camera
This
for
is the
point and
last
shoots?
point and shoot, and we have Canon, the G7X. Now, the
Yeah. Where do
original
we put
one
this?
was like the king YouTube vlogging camera back in 2017, 2016, earlier than that. The Mark III is the latest, and honestly, one thing I like about Canon is they do have really good colors and they're pretty simple to use. Sometimes Sony menus are a little bit complicated. So for someone who's out there just wants to pick up a point and shoot style camera, good colors. I have never personally used this one, but based off of the reviews of the original one, I would probably put it somewhere between like C, maybe D, depending. I would say probably C. What do you think? Because
Okay, here's the case
yeah.
for D tier. Okay. This camera has a 10-minute record limit for
Oh
4K
no.
resolution. 10
F.
minutes.
F.
You want
It's an
F
F
tier? All right,
tier.
we'll go F
F.
tier. It's a great camera. Like you get cool photos, you get good video out of it, but 4K is limited to 10 minutes. And I think 1080p is limited to 30 minutes. So
That's no, we can't
that
have that
record limit is
anymore.
rough. I mean, like, come on, guys. 10 minutes of 4K. You can barely get B-roll clips in under 10 minutes. No, well, I don't know. Okay,
All
so
right, we're moving on to our next category, some mirrorless cameras. So if you are
mirrorless
looking to
cameras.
really improve your image quality of your videos, have the ability to swap out lenses for different looks, we're going to start off with some budget-friendly options. Ideally the APS-C sensor was a little bit more affordable, lots of lens options to choose from. We have the Canon R10 on the list, and Craig, I know you've used this camera. I believe you reviewed it too. What's
Yeah,
your
so
take on the R10?
the R10 is a pretty solid entry level mirrorless camera. So it's actually, it kind of sits like mid tier in terms of the APS-C cameras that Canon makes. So there's a couple underneath it that we'll talk about, the R50 and R100. So if I was going to go myself for a more budget friendly APS-C camera, the R10 is probably the one that I would go for on the Canon side. It does have, I believe, a 2-hour record limit for 4K, and that's just because of internal heat performance. But that's a lot
Mm.
better than the next two cameras that we'll talk about. So image quality looks really good. Autofocus is great, and the build quality is really nice, and it feels really good in the hand. It's just a little bit of a beefier grip than the R50 is. So I would probably put it in terms of mirrorless cameras. Like, I mean, it's kind of insulting to put it C tier, but I think there's some better options even in the APS-C line. So I might put it C or B tier. Do you have opinions on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't pick it over the ZV-1 in my opinion. I think one thing you have to take a look at with Canons is you have to invest in their whole lens ecosystem. And Canon has kind of been a little bit stringent on who can make lenses for their mount versus Sony. There's
Yes.
thousands of lens options to choose from. And Canon's a little bit more specific. You have to use their lenses. It can be a little bit more expensive. So I would probably knock it down to C tier. Great
Okay.
video camera if you want to
Yeah.
be in the ecosystem, but it does have its limitations.
Yeah, it does. There's nothing really wrong with it. So don't let, if you have access to an R10 or you have the R10, don't let this ranking make you feel bad. It's a very good camera still, but we're just trying to rank it, against each other in this video. So we'll go to the R50. And so, the R50 has its challenges for sure. And the biggest
Mhm.
challenge is going to be 1 hour record limit for 4K. So if you want to do any sort of long form video podcasting, live streaming, this is not going to be a great camera if you're recording internally. And the other thing about it is it's kind of disingenuous for Canon to say it's 1 hour because the camera will overheat before 1 hour for sure in 4K.
Ooh.
And in my testing, it's more like 30 minutes, 32 minutes, 37 minutes, depending on if I'm indoors or outdoors, if sun's hitting the camera. So overheating is an issue with some of these more entry level budget Canon cameras. But at the end of the day, if it's what you have, it does get really good image quality and you can take really good photos. So, shorter bursts, shooting B-roll, it could be a really good B-roll camera in particular, but I would not choose this over the R10. So it's probably going to have to go down to D tier, relatively
Ooh.
speaking, to the
Right.
other. I mean, what do you
So the
think?
R10 is a higher model than the R50, and the R50 is higher into the next camera, which is the R100.
Oh,
So this
man.
one is Canon's cheapest mirrorless camera. I think it was on sale for like $300 for the body only. So pretty affordable, especially if you are looking at a camera that does photo and video. But Craig, I gotta tell you, I really don't like this camera for video. Uh, it has 4K, but what it does is it crops in on the sensor. So if you got your shot all nice and labeled, then you switch over to 4K, it suddenly crops in, and then the autofocus
Yeah.
in 4K is really, really bad too. So I think this deserves another F. What do you
An
think?
F tier. Oh man, I feel horrible putting cameras in F tier, but I would have to agree with you. Looking at the 4K footage out of this camera is just sad. it just makes me sad. Like when I saw your
Mhm.
review on this camera, I'm like, guys, why just don't even allow 4K to be an option in this camera. Just make it a 1080p
Mhm.
camera and it'll be fine, you know? It actually takes really good photos.
It
So for
does.
under
Phenomenal photos, and if you're
dude,
looking just for that and the ability to shoot maybe 1080p video, it's pretty solid, but there are better options. I think what if we wanted to bump it up to a D tier, it's because it's so cheap, but I think we should just leave it right where it is.
we'll leave it at up tier. All right, we're gonna go to a couple Nikon APS-C cameras, which these two are actually pretty good in terms of Nikon's ecosystem. Z30, I have the Z30 here in the
Nice.
studio with me. I've used it before many times, shot reviews with this. It has really good autofocus too. I will say that. Like Nikon has come a long way in terms of their video cameras, and they've kind of been known as like the photo camera company for so long. And actually, Nate, you were telling me the other day that I think they still hold the majority of market share in terms of photographers. Is that true
Yeah, I
still?
was surprised about that. A lot of people love Nikon. In the
Yeah.
video world and for YouTube, it's like not many people have Nikon, but they're pretty decent camera. And do feel like they actually make a lot of strides.
They
But
have.
where do you see this one fit? This one does 4K, right?
Yeah, it does 4K. The colors, though, I've noticed are a little bit, they tend to be a little bit cooler on the cooler
Oh,
side of the
interesting.
Z30. So you can warm it up, obviously, using white balance or color correction. You do have a tally light on the front of the camera, which I think is pretty cool. So overall, I like it. I probably, we'll get into some of these other rankings, Fuji, Sony for APS-C as well. So I probably wouldn't rank it too high. Might be
Mhm.
C tier right alongside the R10. Do you feel good about that ranking?
That seems pretty appropriate. Yeah, I would probably still get a ZV1 over it, probably even a Mark II, but yeah,
Yeah.
that looks good. We
Okay.
have Nikon's other camera. This is a higher end model, ZV50 Mark
Yep.
II, which came out recently.
Yes, it did. And we're actually going to hopefully stay tuned. Hopefully, we're going to do a dedicated review on this camera because it actually is very viable. And now the
Mm,
one crazy thing about this camera is it uses the sensor from the Nikon D500, which is like nearly a 10-year-old camera. I that was one of my first cameras I bought as I was learning photography and shooting weddings. And so it's a pretty old sensor. I will say it's like one of the best APS sensors that Nikon has truly ever made, but any camera manufacturer has ever made. So I like the camera. It's got potential. It's got really good autofocus. It has a new processor inside of it. So it's going to process images and video clips a lot quicker. So I'd probably put it B tier for now in terms of YouTube
okay,
performance. If you feel good about that, we'll just party on right along to Fuji.
let's go.
All
Fuji.
right.
I mean, I'm kind of a secret fan of Fujifilm. They have some of the best colors for photo and video.
Yep.
Um, they also have pretty
X-T5.
solid autofocus performance. So we'll take a look at kind of their mid level. So it's a little bit more expensive, but not full professional. X-T5. I
Yeah.
would honestly, I think this is a great camera. I think it can do like 6K, yeah, crazy resolutions, 10-bit. So I would probably put this B, because
The
because
X-T5 or the M5? So we have both of these here. Let me just bring these
yes.
up here. We'll bring them up and we'll check them out. Okay. So I think the X-T5, if I remember correctly, well, first of all, it has like a 40 megapixel sensor, which is insane. This is the most megapixels you can get out of an APS-C camera, I believe, at the time of recording this video. So
That's
it's an
amazing.
insane amount of like when you think about that, the sensor is so small. So there's so many pixels packed in that little sensor. It's like a full frame equivalent of like a 60 or 70 megapixel camera. It's really dense. So great for photography. I think there are some issues though. I think that XT5 though, isn't it 4K up to only 60 maybe? I'll have to fact check
That is a
myself.
good question. Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up while we look in the
Let's
background
do it.
here.
Pull it up. I think it's 4K up to 60. And I think there's also some weird quirks with crop modes. Maybe somebody in the comments
Mm.
below would be able to help us. I think there's some weird crop modes that happen with different sampling modes. If you use like a higher sampling rate or something, you get different crops. And
So this
it's just
camera
kind of
can
quirky.
do 6K, 422 10-bit, which is fancy, but really high resolution, really good color,
Wow.
detail, and information. So in many ways, it's like higher spec than some of the Sony ones out there. Image stabilization, Honestly, it's a pretty solid camera. I don't really see where there's the crop mode factors.
Interesting.
We'd have to do our due diligence and
I will.
maybe we'll make a future review about this because that seems pretty impressive
It
compared
does.
to
That is
like,
actually pretty impressive
yeah.
because I know the XM5 can do a lot of that too. This newer camera that's like,
Oh yeah.
it's
This one's
6K.
like a good almost competitor to the ZV-E10, which we will take a look at, but we have been recommending forever. But this one has 10-bit, 6K, and what's really cool, I'm getting really nerdy with cameras. If you don't mind me indulging, it can do what's called open gate, which means it actually camera sensors are a little bit taller than traditional 16:9 video. So if you ever take a photo, it's more of a square, but this can take the video using the whole sensor. And that's really cool for cropping if you want to adjust yourself in post, if you want to raise up or lower, or even crop in for vertical video. It's pretty useful. So I do like OpenGate, and that probably be a feature we'll hear more of down the line. So honestly, let's put these two cameras on the board. I would probably, honestly, I'd probably both give them a B because they're great cameras. The
Yeah.
X-T5 is a little bit more expensive, a little more features. XM5 is also pretty good, but at a cheaper price point.
Cool. I love it. I love it. Fuji, nobody can replicate that film simulation from Fuji. It's just such a cool just effect,
I
So,
love it. Yep.
all right, let's dive into some Sony APS-C options. So the first one we have ZV-E10, the OG
The
ZV-E10. Where should we
original.
pop this bad boy? I mean, dude, I love this camera. I love it. What do you think?
This camera is probably your best go-to if you're looking to do YouTube content in particular. We are very focused in on the YouTube content creation. It has 4K, has the flip out screen, has great autofocus. Sony's lens mount, you can choose almost any lens you want. It's a pretty good looking image. It is a little bit older now. It's a few years old. I think it was announced back in 2021.
Yeah.
But what really makes this a great camera is its price point. If you're wanting to get a mirrorless camera and you don't have a bunch of money, the ZV-10 is the one to get because anything else in this price range is not really there yet. Like they're either too
Yeah.
expensive, they have more features. But if you're looking for a basic camera to just shoot talking head videos, I think the ZV-10 is really that camera. Craig, where do you think this should be placed?
I already popped this bad boy into A tier. I feel like it's an A tier camera. I don't think it's S tier necessarily, but in terms of
Could be better,
value, yeah,
but
it could be better. I
value.
mean,
Yep.
I could easily see it, in terms of image quality and features, it's maybe more of a B tier camera, but for price to performance ratio, it's especially used. You can get these things used. Like you said, it's 2021 release date. So there's cameras out there floating around. I got mine used for $500 body only. It's very hard to find a camera for $500 that's going to perform better than the original ZV-E10. So I like A
And I
tier.
still use mine. Sorry,
Me
I
too.
still use mine for my overhead camera angle. So when I'm filming like unboxings or B-roll, I just leave that rigged up. And because I only need just like it's probably a little overkill for this setup,
Yeah.
but
Well, you
I
can
didn't
even
need to
see it back there
spend
in the background. Look at that.
yeah,
That's nice.
right
There it is.
pointing down, little zoom lens on it so I can adjust my frame. So great overall performance. Let's leave it at A. Let's go
Okay.
to the ZV-10 Mark II because this is a camera
Oh
that's
man.
on many things it's better than the ZV-10, more expensive, but I think that kind of puts it at a unique position because is it necessarily better? Is it worth spending the extra $300-$400 potentially? What do you
Yeah.
think, Craig?
I think it depends on who you are. If you're somebody who really wants to maximize the potential of your image quality, you're color correcting, you're shooting in log footage and you want to color correct log footage, sure, then spend the extra, $300-$400 to upgrade to the Mark II. But I think a lot of people who are doing standard YouTube videos, you're not going to need some of those benefits and improvements. And the standard 4K footage and up to 30 frames per second in the Mark I is going to be enough. So it really just depends on what your needs are. Also, overheating is kind of a concern. We've done some overheating tests, and I think the ZV-E10 Mark II gets a lot hotter, runs hotter, and I have concerns about overheating as opposed to the Mark I. I didn't have those concerns as much. But if you use dummy batteries, which is kind of like a sort of like a fake battery that you attach to your wall and you plug it into your wall to send power to your camera. If you use a dummy battery for both of these, it kind of eliminates a lot of that too. So I'd be fine probably keeping them both at A tier because it is such an expensive upgrade to go for the Mark II. But I could see a case for the E10 being an S tier camera as well.
Yeah, I think that's pretty appropriate. It's like depending if you need the extra capability. I do like some of the newer menu options. It's a little bit more focused for creators. Also, yeah, 10-bit, that's great for color grading. My background is like filmmaking video, so I like having that flexibility to get the colors exactly where I want it. So ZV-10 Mark II, pretty great, has its downsides, but depending on which one you need. Let's move over to the Sony FX30, which, by the way, has the exact same sensor as the Mark II. So we're talking
Yep.
about the very similar image, just different bodies. That's what Sony really likes to do is they kind of reuse the same sensors, but put it in different functionality, different style bodies, depending on if you're more of a photographer, video production, vlogger. You have different bodies you can put it in. So this
Yep.
one doesn't really have that overheating concern because it
No.
actually has a fan built in. So it's going to keep it cool, keep it running. That said, it's pretty expensive compared to
Yeah.
some of these other options. This is, I think, 1,600, 1,700. You might find
Yeah,
it
right
on
around.
sale.
Yep. Yeah, it's right in that
There's
range.
also the benefit of plugging in an XLR with the little top handle adapter,
Yep.
which could be pretty nice because I mean, I'm actually using something very similar for my A7S III, and that's how I'm able to get my microphone going into the video, which is then being shared on screen. So I would say this camera, in many ways, is probably A as well. It's great. It's just more expensive, but if you need if you're starting getting really in production and you just want reliability and peace of mind, you might want to that extra cost might be worth it
Yeah.
for you.
You don't think it's S tier though? You don't think it's quite S tier up here with the Pocket 3? Like, nothing else touches the FX30 in terms of APS-C.
Maybe
I mean,
you
what
could
do you
challenge
think?
me on this, but in my opinion, this is we're getting nitpicky now.
Yeah.
Something about Sony's APS-C cameras are a little bit more noisy, especially compared to the full frame.
They are.
I do find myself even if I go to 800 ISO, I'll get this weird color pattern that I don't necessarily get on the full frame. And so I think the image quality of Sony's full frame cameras is a bit better. So I wouldn't put it S tier, but
Okay.
it's a great camera. It's like the ZV-10, right? It's great,
Yeah.
but if you just have a little bit more requirements, then. But what
Sure.
are your thoughts on that? Do you think
Yeah, no,
that's
I mean,
appropriate?
I
Put it
think
S?
I agree. Yeah, I mean, you do get full size HDMI.
All right,
That's true.
guys, I'm sorry. I have to interject here. Do you know
Kyle.
I'm coming on behalf of the chat and other people. I think S tier, FX30, reliability, no overheating. You're gonna get what you're gonna get. Stability. It's a great camera.
All right, I'll
I
accept
think
it.
it is worth every penny for it.
And you know what? I'm actually using it right now. So it's my streaming camera.
Come on.
It's my desk camera. This is like the main desk I film and do video calls at. I'll go S tier. I'm with it, Kyle. I accept.
I beseech you.
Thanks for hopping on here,
That's
boss.
just what I feel. But anyway, sorry, I was listening, and I felt the stir to jump in and just give my my input on that. So
I love it.
I don't know. I'll leave that to you guys. I'll let you guys do that. But anyways,
the FX30 is a
Continue.
camera that we use in the studio a little bit more because there's the extra requirements for just making sure things run smoothly. So Craig's using them, Omar's used them, Kyle's used them in their studio. So great option as well. We have our next camera, A6700. Again, it's the same sensor, different body. So what advantage do you get to the A6700? This is a camera if you want that hybrid between photo and video because you get a little viewfinder, which is super nice if you want to take photos, you're shooting outside. You can also use it for video if you want to hold it up. Great feature for photography, definitely more oriented to that. but
Yep.
pretty much it's the FX30 in a different body. So also, I don't think that camera has overheating as much, but there could be more potential because there's not a fan.
Yeah.
But I would say that's probably A tier as well, just depending on what kind of body do you want.
Yep. I wouldn't bump it all the way up to S tier. Now, all that said, I mean, if you want the cheapest way to get that 10-bit sensor out of Sony would be,
Mhm.
you know, the ZV-E10 Mark II. But if you're a hybrid shooter, you want the photos, you'd go for the A6700. I think there's also IBIS in the A6700. So you're going to get better stabilization
Yes.
if you're, you know, vlogging
That's
or
actually a
you're
pretty
even.
good point you bring up because I went to and was like filming with the ZV-10, like getting B-roll, and my lens didn't have stabilization, and I forgot that the camera didn't either. So my footage was a little bit more shaky compared to a stabilized sensor. So if you
Yep.
are hand holding, filming yourself vlogging, I do think that is a good reason to upgrade. Again, having smooth footage is pretty nice if you are vlogging. You don't want things to be too shaky.
Yep. And I think the A6700 is like maybe 1,500 or 14. I think it's $1,400. And so you're going to pay $400 more than the ZV-E10 Mark II, but you're getting the viewfinder and IBIS and a little bit better thermal performance. So it's probably worth the upgrade for a lot of people if you're especially a hybrid shooter, but I digress. These are basically the same camera in terms of image quality, but I would put the FX30 S tier. I agree with Kyle. Thanks for hopping in, Kyle. Okay.
All right, Craig, we're going to move on to another category, full frame cameras. So we're kind of increasing the cost, going to full frame. Bigger sensor requires bigger glass, which is more
Yep.
expensive, but you do get a lot of advantages if you want the best image quality. You really got a lot of money to spend and a lot of money to burn. You'd want to look at a full frame camera. And the first on the list is from Panasonic, the S5 II. There's also someone mentioned in the chat the S5 IIX. Very similar. It has a little bit more pro features, but we're going to just kind of classify them as the same camera for this
Yeah.
kind of breakdown. Craig, do you have any experience with Panasonic? Because I shot with them a little bit, but I was curious if you ever used them.
You know, my extent with Panasonic would be things like the GH5, the GH4. I like that series of cameras, micro four
Mhm.
thirds, really good. I love the high frame rates back in the day for like shooting concert films and stuff, but low light performance was rough on those cameras. So I
Mhm.
haven't really used Panasonic. I've been a Sony guy for the last like, you know, 7, 8 years or so. So, but the S5, I mean, I know there's a lot of great pros about it, especially right now. I think it's on sale for like $1,600 and is
That's a
under
great
always
price.
under 2,000, which is crazy for, I mean, the value that you're getting out of the S5 II, really good. Have you
It's
used
like
this
same
camera?
price as the FX30, but it's full frame, right? So
Yes.
you're not going to be worried. What Panasonic's great at is they do think about things like overheating on the S5 II. You're not going to have that issue. Again, that open gate feature we talked about, just shooting the full sensor, you have that as well. Great colors, great ability to adjust things in post. Honestly, I think this camera is very, very comparable to some of Sony's full frame. This is the first full frame camera from Panasonic that has really great autofocus. So that's why it gets a mark on this list
True.
here. So
Yep.
I would put this probably A. What do you think? Because it is a pretty great camera. There are some better ones out there, but I do think from the image quality, having shot with similar Panasonic cameras, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I would go A tier for sure. I just think the performance you're getting for the cost is
Yeah,
really
great price.
unmatched. Like, where else would you get a full frame camera that is this good with this good autofocus? And isn't there an internal fan with the Panasonic This one does have the internal fan, I'm pretty sure. It's got like this weird fan cooling system. So
I think it does. Yeah. And
yeah,
you get the viewfinder as well. So honestly, this was a good hybrid photo as well. Now, what probably doesn't make it the S tier is the L mount, the actual lens mount you use. It's still better than Canon or Nikon, in my opinion, because there's more manufacturers making for L mount. But if you do want the best mount to choose any lens option, for sure the E mount is going to give you more options. L mount is slowly building to that, but that's probably why it doesn't fully go to S, in my opinion.
that's great. That's a great analysis. Well, let's jump over to the Canon R5 Mark II. So this camera
Ooh.
is amazing.
This is
I mean,
expensive, boy.
it is. It's
This is
$4,300,
whew.
which is a lot. I mean, but you have to think about what you're getting with this, okay? It's similar specs to like the Sony A1, which is $2,200 more. So
Mm,
4,300 for this. You're getting so many great things. 8K, 60 FPS in raw video recording. Insane, dude.
that's
I mean,
crazy.
like where else are you able to get that for $4,300? You know, you got 30 frames per second. I think like blackout shooting too for photos. So this to me, like for value, if you want the best hybrid camera for the money, like you just want the best, it's probably the R5 Mark II, in my opinion, from what I've seen. My friend has this camera and I've used it before. And when it's in my hand, I'm just like, dude, this thing is just magnificent. Like this is the camera that makes me want to switch over to Canon. I haven't done it because I do have the A1 and I think the A1 is amazing as well. But I would rock this camera. I mean, if I was still shooting weddings professionally and stuff, like or concerts, this is a beast. What do you think?
I mean, this is probably the only camera on the list that does 8K. So you get like amazing image, but we start to get like diminishing returns. Is it worth that price? Do you even need 8K? It's probably a little bit too much for my needs as an editor. I'm looking for something really efficient, and
Yeah.
maybe I don't want to have 8K files for the amount of videos we shoot. So I would probably say it's also an A tier. What do you think?
Oh man, it's like in terms of specs, it's S tier.
It's S,
In
yeah.
terms of price, you know, price drives it down maybe. But I mean, I don't know. I'm torn. Maybe we can revisit after we look at our final list, we can make any adjustments and I'll see if we want to bump this up to S tier.
Hmm.
But okay.
Sounds
For now,
good.
let's jump over to Sony. There's oh man, we have several Sony full frames. We'll start with the A7 IV and we'll just work through these. Thanks guys for watching too. I mean, I know we're going really in depth here, but we'll try to answer some of your questions too along the way here and at the end of this stream. So the A7 IV, Nate, do you have the A7 IV? Have you used this guy?
I've had it for a couple years now. I had sold it, but phenomenal camera, great image quality. It's very sharp for the 4K video because it's actually a 7K sensor and
Yeah,
it's like doing some crazy math to make it 4K. So you get like the efficiency of a smaller file, but it looks really good.
really sharp.
It's an amazing camera. Now, this camera had a little bit of potential to run a bit hotter as well because it has an amazing sensor behind it. So I would probably put that as an A tier. I think it's new around $2,200. Now, the thing is, Craig, an A7 V might come around the corner,
I
and
know.
that might be an S tier camera. We'll see. But
Yeah,
for A7 IV, let's leave it at the A.
I accept that. Okay, we'll go A7 III. We threw this one on the
Okay.
list just because it's kind of an interesting camera. This was actually what made me make the change from Sony or
Ooh.
from Nikon. I was shooting on Nikon at the time, switched over to Sony because of this full frame A7 III. It's a really good camera. I took this on tour with me across the US when I was touring with different artists. I took it overseas like Vietnam, Guatemala. This thing just traveled the world with me. I love this camera. It's so good. There are some limitations though, serious limitations, including 8-bit color. I know, Nate, you're not a big fan of the 8-bit sensor out of this camera. So, you know, I'll let you save your gripes for a second. You also get the 30-minute record limit. So any camera, let me explain this very briefly. There is a tax. I believe the EU had a camera tax, like an import tax on cameras that recorded over 30 minutes. And because they classified those as like professional video cameras. So every camera after 2019 or is like 2020 removed that record limit, but the A7 III still has the record limit. So that's a big barrier for people who are doing
Mm.
professional work. But at the end of the day, I think it's one of like the best full frame. They still sell this camera new actually, which is
Really?
crazy. So it's a really good camera. I would probably though, you know, I would buy almost all of these APS-C options, even the point and shoots over the A7 III. It might be
You
B
could
tier.
probably get the A7 III used for pretty for I think I've seen them $1,300, $1,200.
Oh,
And
easy.
and here's the thing too. This was the go-to camera 3, 4 years ago. All of those tutorials of people shooting amazing video with this camera, you can also just learn those skills and make a great image out of
Yeah.
this camera if you don't have the most expensive needs. The A7 III, is also wonderful for photography. So just weighing out your needs and what's appropriate, I do think that's a pretty good camera.
Sunny Blur says 8-bit color,
Bit
automatic F
automatic
tier.
F. That
That's
is a
hilarious.
great point. It depends on, again, your use case. I know a lot of people don't even color grade their videos, so there really isn't a point to shoot 10-bit if it's going to be seen as 8-bit anyway. But
Exactly.
yeah, if you're a professional looking for video, I do agree.
That's
There's
hilarious.
always a challenge between me because like as a professional, you got to have 10-bit, but as like relating to the creator, it's like you may not even need that.
Yeah, you may not. Okay, what do you think ranking B or C tier?
I'd probably let's put that as B. It's not quite A
Okay,
in many ways. Like ZV1's 8-bit. This camera is just like a full frame powerhouse. So I would say that's
true.
pretty.
Yeah, both
It's
of these
pretty
are 8-bit.
equal.
I think Z50 Mark II is 8-bit.
Ooh,
So, okay.
yeah.
Um,
The Fujis are the only 10-bit on that, and the
yeah,
GoPro.
yep. Okay, so A7C II, this is
Okay,
basically the same camera as the
it is.
A7 IV, so it'll at least get A tier, except it's the compact version, and there are a couple differences
Hmm,
with this camera. What are the two? Okay, there's the AI processing chip actually went into the
interesting.
A7C II over the A7 IV. So you're going to technically get better autofocus. In theory, it's like better autofocus tracking of different subject recognition, so it can recognize things a little bit better. I will say it's marginal. Like I don't even really notice a difference when I've used the A7C II over the A7 IV. It's really marginal, but you get that adjustment. I also think they did one more thing. Oh yes, dude, the USB-C streaming. This is going to
Hmm,
bring it up to S tier. Okay, this is why.
okay.
And you can argue me, and we can bump it back down. The A7 IV USB-C streaming feature limits to 4K at 15 frames per second.
Hmm.
How that is so useless. 15 frames a second, so it's effectively a 1080p streaming camera through USB-C. You could do
Gotcha.
HDMI, capture card or whatever. But they upgraded the USB-C port to allow for 4K up to 30 FPS. Yeah, so I love the A7C II new processing chip. Also has a new IBIS system too. It's a 7-stop
Okay.
IBIS
Wow.
versus the A7 IV was a 5.5-stop IBIS system. And hopefully, these people are going to fact check me and maybe I'm wrong on one of these stats, but I'm trying to do this all off the top. I got some notes that I'm trying to reference to. I'm trying to remember all this, but I think it is a 7-stop IBIS. So people roast me if I'm wrong. Just let me know, please.
That's incredible. Well, we have the A7S3 on the list. And Craig, I'm a little bit nostalgic of this camera because I've had it since it first came out. I've used this thing for YouTube, weddings, short films, music videos. I've already done everything with this camera. And every time I've used it, it's held up, had
Yeah.
no issues. Actually, I did have one small issue because I used it so much, the flip out screen kind of got a little bit loose. And
Oh,
so
really?
I had to send it in to Sony and they fixed it. But since then, no issues. And I think this is such an amazing camera, great image. It's a good balance between being sharp, but also not like crazy sharp. Full frame, 10-bit. You can shoot up to 120 frames per second. Full frame, no cropping, no nothing like that. So pretty incredible camera. In my opinion, that goes to S.
S tier, I agree. I mean, it's amazing. And I think the only complaint that I hear people say is just that it's old. It's just a little bit older. We might see an A7S 4. Who knows? Maybe this year. Maybe. I mean, it's a little bit old. Was it 2020 that this came out? I think it was
I got
2020.
mine like October of 2020. And
Yeah.
there's really been no need to upgrade. And that's how
No.
crazy of a good camera that is.
So I had this camera for maybe 2.5 years. I sold it though for our next camera, the FX3 full
Ooh,
frame. And so that's going to go straight to S tier. I mean, there's no arguing. It's an amazing camera. Price is kind of ridiculous. You're $3,800. But
mhm,
here's why I sold it, Nate. Okay. Why I sold the
okay. I
A7S3.
hear you.
Because I think entry point for the A7S3 is like 3,500 new, maybe 3,400 new. And then the FX3 is 3,800, but you get the audio top handle with the camera.
Nice.
So I was like, what am I doing? Like I sold my A7S III even 2 years later for almost $3,000. And so I upgraded. I got the top handle, which I love using to record and shoot with. And you can run 2 XLR inputs into that. And so the difference with the FX3 and the FX30 is obviously the sensor size, but also the FX3 just comes with the top handle. It's included in the price. The FX30, you have to select an option to add the top handle, and then it adds another like $300 or $400 to the price. So that's a little distinction there between the two of them. But I love FX3. We use it all the time. Kyle uses it as one of his main workhorse cameras in the studio at Anderson Studios. So we love FX3 around here. Do you? Okay, you can argue with me if you disagree, but do you?
I think that's appropriate. And I mean, I would argue with you, but I can't on this one. So, well, let's go over. This is a controversial camera.
Okay.
ZV-E1. You might argue with me on this.
I might put this bad boy down here.
I've argued with myself on this camera. When it first came out, I saw it. I'm like, it has the same sensor as the A7S III, but it was in a cheaper body. It didn't have the viewfinder, didn't have full HDMI, all these things I was used to for my professional needs. But the thing about this camera is it's $2,200 new, which is significantly cheaper than the A7S III and FX30, and you get the exact same image. And what they made with this camera is they made it for the vlogger, the creator in mind. So I was looking for another camera like the A7S III, but I didn't want to spend as much. So I decided to get the ZV-E1, and I've actually got it used for like $1,500. So crazy cheap. And it's the exact same image quality. And for how I use it, I've not experienced the overheating issues people had talked about. So really, in my opinion, this, I mean, I would say it's an S, but I'm going to put it A because it's technically not as good as A7S III, but it's so cheaper compared to them. And depending on how you use it, it all just depends on how it works together. Yeah, it's technically on paper, it's not as good, but for the pure use case, I think that's what you have to really ask yourself is getting a camera and just using it, learning how to max it out. Doesn't matter what camera you use. There are better financial options, and that's what we're trying to filter through here. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you got to pick up a camera, get to use, put your creative spin on it, and then you're off to the races. So I put it A.
I accept that. I think that's
plus.
Right. A+. Yeah, it can go to the top of these here. We didn't really organize them very well. Okay. Anyways, I agree with you, Nate. We got one more. This is the A1. The Sony A1.
Mark II.
Well, this is the Mark II, yeah. So I have the original A1, and we just did a review about the A1 Mark II. So on paper, I mean, right, it's like, is there a better camera? Not really. It's so good. It's amazing in every way. It was kind of underwhelming for the release because everybody's like, we've seen all these features before, right? Like this camera has this one has, but we haven't seen it all in one body, people. Like, come on, give them some credit here. They put all of the great features in the A1 Mark II. So S tier, I'm tempted, but here's why, Nate, I think we should actually rank it down. $6,500 entry. That's insane.
Cheap
dude.
car.
Yes.
that costs more than my car.
It's way too expensive. Like $6,500 is like, you can get multiples of these cameras with lenses. You could build a full podcast studio for $6,500 and the A1 Mark II. So just for that alone, would you agree with me, dude? Like, yeah, the value, like I think the value comes down, even though the performance is so good, the price is so much that like right here, the R50 Mark II, if I'm trying to go like dollar for dollar and get the best image quality and best hybrid, it probably is the A1 too, but I'd rather buy the R5 Mark II from Canon and then get some glass for that same price. So I'd probably put it like B tier or even C tier in terms of value because it's just so expensive.
Yeah, when it comes to YouTube creation, again, there's diminishing returns when it comes to this. It is a great camera, but the reason I do think it's B tier is a lot of what Sony does is a lot of features that are in the A1 Mark II is going to come into a potential A7 V or A7S4, FX3 II. So I think it's worth waiting for those things. And that'll be a better financial option. But if you just got money to burn, I mean, the A1 II could be an S tier for you.
Yep, I agree. Okay, this is the rank. Is there anything we need to adjust, Nate? Like as we look at this,
Ooh.
maybe we should check some of the comments real quick, see if there's anything here. I'm gonna look through these. What's up, chat? What do you got? A7cii.
Do you agree with this list? Do you think we should adjust it? I mean, yeah, I do think having used the E1, the full frame, like I did dislike it at first, but after using it, it's grown on me. So I do think that is potentially a higher ranking one. But I know for a lot of people on paper, if you're looking for a good camera, it's very similar. I'd say it's probably similar to an A7C II, cheaper, vlogger focused. That might be one adjustment I would make, but I'm hearing from you guys, they're saying A tier, so maybe we should just keep it where it's at.
They're saying A tier. What about this comment right here? I think R5 is S tier. I got somebody who kind of agrees with me. We should bump this up.
R5 Mark II.
I mean, what do you think, Nate? I know we're not really. I'm trying to be not biased because everybody knows we shoot Sony. And
well, let's talk about that. Why do a lot of our options are Sony? There are cameras from Canon, Nikon, Panasonic. I've used a lot of different brands, but when we come to content creation, largely we focused on Sony. Are we in cahoots with Sony? What is the deal? Craig, take it away.
No, we're not in cahoots. I think for us, it comes down to the fact that, well, okay, Nate and I's background is in production work. So both of us have done professional production stuff a bunch, right? My background is like, I was a director of video production for a university for 4 years. And I also shot a bunch of weddings, a ton of weddings, goodness. I've been on tour with artists, shooting concert films, love doing that. So my background is in production. Now, Nate and I, and same with Nate, Nate's shot all sorts of short films and stuff. Now, Nate and I are YouTube creators. So our needs are a little bit different than maybe they were when we were in full-time production. But even still, when I was in full-time production, we were shooting on Sony systems, FX6s. We had a Burano at the university I was using and A7S3s and all sorts of things. So Sony and the main reason is I like ease of use and I like peace of mind. And Sony just gives me the peace of mind with their autofocus. I never have to worry about autofocus performance. Why did you, though, Nate? Why did you choose Sony as your main system as opposed to like, Canon or Panasonic something?
Yeah, the most expensive camera I've used is the Alexa Mini, which is pretty expensive, and that's video production. That's a certain camera. That's not a YouTube camera. Yeah. I've used Blackmagics before. Phenomenal image quality. They, I think, have some of the best image quality, the robustness of the video files. But again, that camera doesn't have autofocus, and that's really needed when it comes to shooting YouTube. And so I would personally love to recommend other camera brands. Every time I looked at a new camera release, I don't know what people are thinking, but it doesn't have the same needs I need as a content creator. I think DJI is doing a really good job listening to the creators' needs. I think Sony is also listening. I think Canon, Nikon, and Panasonic are slowly listening, but they're not quite there. So hopefully in a couple years' time, we might have some of those cameras pop up a bit more. But that's kind of the reason why we're recommending Sony. It's not because, we have any incentive to. It's just because that's the camera we use and we want to recommend because we are looking to make our videos better, faster, and not have to worry about, oh, was I in focus for this take? Having that clarity throughout your shoot is important. And so that's why many of the cameras we have rated a little bit higher have things like autofocus, a flip out screen, having image stabilization, great stuff. So
that's great.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I echo everything you just said. Totally agree. We have a super chat here. I want to make sure we get to from Richard asking about the R50. How long does it last as far as filming? And is it good for outdoor filming content? I'll answer the second question first. Yes, it is great for outdoor filming content. We did a review where we compared the R50 versus the R10 versus Sony cameras and Nikon Canons. Like they're all of them are really good for filming outside in well-lit environments. Even some of the smaller sensors, older cameras, outdoors looks great, especially if you put a little ND filter on the front of your camera lens, which can help cut out light to help you shoot at proper exposures. So that is a little tool that you could add to the front of your camera lens. But the reason that we put it down here in D tier, if you were late to the stream, maybe you didn't see this, is one of the main reasons is its record time is really suffers. And so I believe in my testing, well, first of all, there's a 1 hour record limit just built into the camera. You can't record longer than 1 hour already. But when you shoot in 4K, it tends to overheat before that. So you're only going to get about 30 minutes, depending on if you're outside too. You like to shoot outdoors, maybe longer clips. You're not going to get that hour of record time. And, you know, maybe you're just shooting B-roll clips that are shorter, 30 seconds at a time, a minute at a time. You won't have any issues there. But I like to buy cameras that are multifaceted so that we can do long form podcasting with them, maybe, or some live streaming, and a B-roll camera and an A-roll camera, right? So the R50, I think, just struggles with some of that versatility that some of the other cameras offer, which is why I would save just a little bit more for the Canon R10 in particular. So, Rashad, I hope that answers your question. Thank you so much for the super chat. Appreciate that.
Well, I do want to take a moment just to say that if you are starting out, you're trying to learn your cameras, you know, maybe we didn't rank your camera you have very highly, but you know what's even more important than cameras is the ability to make great videos and having a good idea. And so I want to invite you guys to partake and get serious about your YouTube journey, how to make better videos. Yes, cameras are fun and exciting, but that's a small part of the equation. There's scripting, there's the idea. If you want to go from learning how to do a great video from the idea all the way to publish all the best procedures, then I invite you to join the Tube 1K challenge that we're hosting later this month. Sean is going to go deep on how to get the best videos, how to come up with a great idea, how to make a good thumbnail. Me and Craig are kind of working behind the scenes and we'll give feedback. I've personally went through lots of people's different thumbnails and gave critiques. And so if you want to partake for free later this month, go to Tube 1K Challenge. You can sign up. And we actually host these throughout the year. So if you do miss this one, maybe it's not the right timing, you can come back, you can join the challenge and really continue to grow and make better videos. But I just want to thank you guys so much for watching and joining us for the stream. Craig, do you have any last statements before we head out?
I think that's it, guys. Thanks for tuning in for this stream. And Nate, great job ranking these cameras. It was fun, man. There's a lot of great ones on here for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll catch you later in a new video.